So a bit about Knack. Knack is basically, I'll start with the question actually. If you had 3 people and you had to choose between who would you hire, or predict who has the potential to be successful as an innovator, or as a salesperson, or as academic, or as a manager. And the question would be, how do you choose? You have limited information. We know about different biases that drive our decisions. And the question would be, well, who do you pick? In most cases, we actually make wrong decisions. Even many experienced people make the wrong decisions. So the question would be, imagine that we actually had access to success signatures, that we had actually data about, behaviorally speaking, what makes a successful innovator, what makes a high-performing person who is in a management role, or what makes a high-performing salesperson, or team leader, or a management consultant, or physician, or a teacher working in public school in an urban community. Imagine that we had those success signatures that go down to the behavioral DNA of people, that actually measure the attributes from cognitive abilities to emotional and social intelligence to personality traits to risk-taking to creativity to many other attributes on the spectrum, and that the particular combination of those traits and the values on those traits actually drives performance, high performance, and enables those individuals to maximize their potentials and to bring it to bear. Now imagine also that we had the behavioral DNA of people. So now we have actually a deep understanding and insight into what makes the person from a behavioral perspective. And we can now, with that data, match people and look how they rank relative to different success signatures. So very early on, we can identify how a person would do and predict whether that person has potential for certain things or certain outcomes or certain professions or majors or minors in college, and figure out who can do what and how we can discover that potential, develop that, nurture it throughout life. So what are the implications of all that? Imagine that we were able to discover Steve Jobs and many like Steve Jobs at web scale. And keep in mind that Steve Jobs was a college dropout, an average person on paper. So many employers today and many elite firms wouldn't take Steve Jobs as an employee. But imagine that we were able to identify Steve Jobs early on, maybe at age 6 or 8 or 10, and put them on accelerated programs to develop and nurture their potential. And would be able to identify hundreds of those people, or maybe thousands in Asia, in Latin America, anywhere around the world. What the implications of that would be for people's lives, for economy, for the pace of technology change, for economic growth. I personally believe this would have amazing implications. This would change the economic landscape in a very fundamental way. Along the way, it would also solve the huge fundamental problems that businesses face in terms of how they discover potential, how they go about winning the war for talent and identifying people who can perform well, not only as innovators, but as managers or team leaders or any other role. Now, the big question, which I didn't tell you anything about, is how do we do that? How do we get the access to that data about outcomes, about success signatures, and about the behavioral makeup of individuals? And the answer is here. So what you see here is one of our games. We have a number of games. This is Wasabi Waiter, where you, the player, play the role of the waiter, and you have to read the emotions of customers coming into your restaurant and serve them the dish that corresponds to their emotion, to their facial expression. And not only do you have to do that and serve multiple customers at the same time, you have to optimize and multitask and figure out what you do first, what you do next, who do you ignore, for example, and not serve at all. There are many pieces, many micro decisions that the player has to engage in and make decisions about throughout the game. Now you see here just a very short video clip of the game, but the game lasts for anywhere between 12-15 minutes to more, and there are multiple decisions and multiple data points that our technology collects while the player plays the game. The advantage of the game, unlike interviews or assessment tools or other instruments that have been used for the past 50 years, including Myers-Briggs and others, is that games are engaging and they tease out and they reveal the true self of a person in a way that is non-alienating and is very natural and engaging. So I'll stop here and let.
So I mean, you've developed a number of different games,
right?
And you've actually now been piloting them with a number of companies?
Right, we've been piloting with companies, and we've piloting also with individuals, students at different colleges and universities.
And what are you finding?
And we collected data from both companies about the performance of employees that participate in our pilots. And we see that we are able to predict who's going to be a high performer for knowledge employees at professional service firms at very high level of accuracy. So we are able to tell, based on gameplay alone, who has the behavioral makeup to match the behavioral signature for high performance, and identify those people and recommend them as candidates for hiring for those companies. Likewise, when we tested our game, an earlier version of this game with the students at Yale, we discovered that we are able to measure and differentiate very specific dimensions about people's personality and cognitive abilities and emotional traits and others at a very fine way. And we were even able to predict at some level of confidence their academic achievement. So if you extrapolate from what I'm presenting here, if you think about the future of education and how people are going to go about discovering their potential, showcasing and broadcasting that to schools, to employers, to colleges and universities, I believe that standardized testing are going to go massive and fundamental change because they are intrinsically limited as tools that are used to discover people's potential. Games, however, are going to be a richer paradigm that enables to get much deeper insight and empower individuals.
I mean, one thing I quickly concluded from trying one of your games was that I wouldn't get hired anywhere because I'm absolutely useless at video gaming. So I mean, I guess this is something for people under the age of 30, and who I guess are.
Well, actually,
everyone is now coming into the workforce with a fair amount of familiarity with playing games and that way of.
So actually, we see that the penetration of games is pretty widespread. You see people from toddlers all the way to people in their 80s or older play games, and they have their preferences, but we're designing the games and we're analyzing the data in such a way that we're able to control for your age, for your gender, and for many other variables in order to get a good read of who the person is. So whether you're 50 years old or 20 years old, and whether you're computer savvy or not, we're going to be able to detect that and give you a good read of who you are.
So, I guess, what sort of companies have you found that are interested in doing this so far?
So we're getting a very broad interest from different industries. We're working, for example, with Shell, the oil major, one of the companies that Matthew mentioned in his piece in May. And what we're doing with Shell is working on discovering the success signature for what makes a very effective innovator. And the idea there is that once we have that signature, and we're going to pilot it very soon, Shell will be able to cast a very broad net and identify potential innovators around the world.
And fire them just so they can go somewhere useful.
Right. So they have 100,000 employees, and they may have some innovators there, which they just don't know about. We're also working with Bain, the management consulting firm, about identifying business talent. We're getting very strong interest from investment banks, from technology firms, from retail.
And your bet is that a management consulting firm like McKinsey or Bain, rather than just go to Harvard and Yale and Stanford,
right,
they could actually probably recruit loads of great people from India.
Right, absolutely. And that's actually a theme that is emerging from all our conversations with our customers and prospective customers, that they would like to recruit people partly for the reasons that Ellen Kuhlman mentioned this morning about the war for talent, but also in terms of reaching out and engaging talent pools and resources that otherwise don't have access to opportunity. So our tool will level the playing field and will enable McKinsey or the likes of McKinsey or Google or others to reach out and find people in India, regardless of whether they were fortunate enough to go to a top school or whether they do well or not on standardized American testing.
Now, one last question. Obviously, you're working to develop the use of games to help us to understand whether someone's good at a particular job. I mean, how far do you think the notion of changing our work to make it engage, to make it more like a game, is actually a line we also ought to be going down, so that work is more fun and more engaging in that way?
Well, I think I'm a true believer in that, and I think that part of what our data will enable us to do to make work more engaging is think about it as behavioral engineering of human productivity. Think about, instead of your manager telling you what you're going to do or who you're going to work with or what role you're going to play, this is actually going to come from the bottom up. People are actually going to showcase internally to the marketplace for potential and opportunity that exists within the enterprise. They're going to showcase their talent and potential, and they're going to be able to assign themselves or pick the right projects or teams and work with others on teams that they enjoy working with or are predicted to be very effective. That's going to drive engagement quite significantly. So I see the data and I see how the workplace is going to be going through many redesigns, fundamental redesigns, by virtue of having data about people and about the workplace itself.
Well, thanks, Guy, for introducing that to us, and very, very interesting indeed.